Chapter 38. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarma of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto
joint military operations with Russia against Islamic State terrorists in Syria. However, closer ties between Ankara and Moscow could put the US in a fairly tricky position. Turkey is considered Washington's key NATO and coalition partner.
The United States as a friend and partner of Turkey.
Turkey's been a strong ally for decades.
We believe Turkey is a genuine partner in destroying ISIL.
NATO member Turkey, along with other nations, is currently fighting ISIL as part of that US-led coalition. But now Turkey's proposal to unite with Russia, which is not a part of that coalition, could make matters pretty complicated. The positions of the US and Russia differ on quite a number of issues concerning Syria. Ankara could be facing a difficult choice. We gauge the reaction of the US State Department to this new development.
Washington, at least publicly, says it would welcome Russian-Turkish joint operations as long as they're targeted at ISIL. Previously, the U.S. rejected the idea of joint operations with Moscow, citing Russia's support for the Syrian government. Turkey is supposedly a member of the U.S.-led coalition against ISIL. The State Department said it was not aware of Turkey's reaching out to Washington prior to making the offer to Moscow.
Certainly, we remain in close contact with our Turkish allies and our partners in the fight against Daesh. We've been clear if work against Daesh, against ISIL is a priority for all of us. If this is truly a step in that direction, we would welcome that.
Does that mark a change in the coalition strategy?
As we've said, and I just said, we have been very clear that if Russia is really interested in taking the fight to ISIL, to combating a terror threat that frankly involves the entire global community, we would welcome their interest in that. We've had doubts in the past. Let's see where this goes. Saeed?
The short answer to her question, does this change the strategy, is no, right?
No, exactly.
It doesn't change.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Russia has long offered the U.S. to join forces to form a broad coalition against ISIL and other terrorists in Syria. The U.S. rejected the offer because it does not want to support the Syrian government in any way. And the State Department now says nothing changes with the fact that Turkey, a member of the U.S.-led coalition against ISIL, wants to carry out joint operations with Russia against ISIL.
Well, I'm joined now by retired Pakistani General Talat Massoud. Give us his expert advice on this matter. Thanks for joining us today on RT, sir. Washington has said this development will not change the coalition's strategy in Syria. Do you think that's likely to be the case?
Well, I think it would be very helpful because, fighting against the ISIL with Turkey would be very good for both Russia and Turkey. Firstly, of course, they have had a bit of a bad relationship for a while because the Turks went wrong when they shot the Russian plane, but now they seem to be cooperating, and that's very helpful in the sense that ISIL is a common enemy of Russia and of Turkey and actually of the rest of the peaceful world. So I think that will be very helpful. At the same time, it will also help Syria indirectly because ISIL is also the enemy of Syria. And so I think think they are doing a very good thing by coordinating their effort and trying to reach to a common enemy. And ISL seemed to be exploiting in the past the differences between various major powers. And I think now Russia and Turkey realize that. At the same time, I think the NATO countries and US should not be worried because ISL is also the enemy of the US. But obviously, Turkey is not very happy with NATO, and because of the developments and the type of support that apparently the Gulen was receiving from US, I think that has slightly brought about tensions between the two countries.
Russia says its long-range bombers like these carried out airstrikes in Syria against ISIS after taking off for the first time from a base in northwest Iran. Russian aircraft, according to the U.S., struck in Aleppo, Idlib, and Deir ez-Zor. The Russians notified the U.S. they were flying into Syria. Moscow insisted it is going after ISIS. The U.S. disagrees.
We have not struck targets in Aleppo in a very long time. We have not struck targets in Idlib in a very long time, if we have at all. We don't see concentrations of ISIS in those areas.
Secretary of State John Kerry called his Russian counterpart to raise concern about using Iran's airbase.
That it complicates what is already a tense, complicated situation.
Publicly, Russia wants the U.S. to agree to joint operations, especially near Aleppo, where tens of thousands of civilians are trapped. The Russian defense minister says Moscow is in very active negotiations with the U.S.
That's his messaging on what he wants to happen to gain an upper hand, as Russia always attempts to do when they're in these kind of negotiations.
Tonight, the State Department said the U.S. is continuing to pursue an agreement. But the U.S. military has been skeptical of any deal with the Russians because of the continued bombing of civilians and anti-Assad rebel groups rather than ISIS targets. The U.S. believes Moscow is still aiming at bolstering the Syrian leader, Bashar al-Assad.
We're nowhere close to reaching a final agreement while they continue to bomb civilian facilities, especially hospitals, which they have done within the last couple of weeks.
If the Russians hope to unnerve the U.S. by using an Iranian airbase to show more cooperation with Tehran, U.S. officials say it did not work. CNN has learned U.S. intelligence assets, including aircraft like these AWACS, were able to track the Russian military as it landed in Iran and throughout its bombing attacks inside Syria.
Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif says Turkey and Iran should stand together in the fight against terrorism and extremism.
Syrian nations should develop their future. We are thinking that we must stand against ISIL and al-Nusra extremism together. We have different approaches to some issues, but we have to create dialogue and organize bilateral meetings with our Turkish counterparts for regional subjects. We are sure that our region hasn't any tolerance against any more fight and extremism.
Zarif made the remarks during a joint press conference with Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu in Ankara. He hailed an improvement in Turkey-Russia ties and their efforts to stem the conflict in Syria. The top Iranian diplomat also congratulated the Turkish government and nation for successfully foiling last month's coup attempt. Çavuşoğlu also praised Iran's support for the Turkish government during and after the coup. Elsewhere in his remarks, the Turkish foreign minister said the two sides have discussed economic cooperation, particularly regarding energy. Çavuşoğlu added that Turkey plans to buy more natural gas from Iran.
There are increased hopes for more international cooperation over Syria. Now, this follows Iran allowing Russia to use an air base and China now saying that it will offer military help to the Syrian government. Here's RT's Gani Chichikan with details.
We're learning that China is seeking closer military ties with Syria. A senior Chinese military official just visited Damascus, where he met with the Syrian defense minister. According to the agency, the Chinese and Syrian officials also talked about the possibility for China to provide military training and humanitarian aid to Syria. This talk about the possibility of China providing military training to Syrian government forces marks a change in China's more detached approach to the war in Syria. China had previously praised praised Russia's role there, but it may now provide more specific support to the fight against terrorists. The Chinese news agency also reported that while in Damascus, the Chinese military official also met with the Russian general. So you have a potential alliance forming not only with China, but also with Iran. This weekend, Russian jets delivered their first airstrikes on terrorist targets in Syria operating from an Iranian airbase. The bombers took off from Hamadan airfield to attack ISIL and al-Nusra facilities in Aleppo, Deir ez-Zor, and Idlib provinces. The Russian Defense Ministry said the strikes had eliminated 5 major terrorist weapons depots and training compounds in the area. So you have a strategic cooperation between Russia and Iran in Syria, and we may now add China to that alliance. The difference between this alliance and the U.S.-led anti-ISIL coalition would be that to go after terrorists, Russia, Iran, and China are supporting the Syrian army, while the U.S.-led coalition is supporting rebel forces in Syria. The problem is those rebel forces sometimes join forces with terrorists, and it becomes difficult to distinguish them from terrorists.
Until now, the largest international force fighting in Syria was the coalition headed by the US. It also comprises the UK, France, Saudi Arabia and numerous other countries backing the rebels. But recent developments point at the possible rise of a new coalition, one supporting the government forces. Iran's already on board, but it could also include China as well as Turkey, particularly after the recent breakthrough in relations between Moscow and Ankara. Let's discuss this story in more detail now. We can cross live to guest Andrew Lung, who's an independent China strategist. Welcome, Andrew. So the report is that China has promised military assistance to the Syrian government. If that's the case, how extensive, though, because this is important, how extensive do you think that military assistance would be?
Well, this is really a breakthrough in China's strategies in the Middle East. And that appears to be more coordination with countries like Russia. I think that this is greatly in China's interest to stabilize the region. There are 3 kind of reasons. The first, of course, is China sees herself as one of the great powers, and as befitting her status as a great power, there is the responsibility to maintain peace and stability in a very important region in the world. And indeed, China has already fielding the largest peacekeeping force in the United Nations. But as far as the Middle East is concerned, it means even more to China, because that is a matter of energy security. A lot of the energy from the Gulf is affected by instability in Syria and in other regions. And thirdly, of course, China has recently launched this One Belt, One Road initiative, connecting Central Asia, certain parts in the Middle East and Europe to China through infrastructure. And this is China's grand plan, as it were. So from all these points of view, it is really in China's interest to play a larger role.
You say it's in China's interest, they're a major player in the region, but they're relatively late to this party, if I can use that reference. Why did they hold back so long?
Well, because in the beginning you can see that the whole region is in a great turmoil. There is not just a black and white kind of thing between the Western-led bloc, as it were, and the bloc led by Russia, but there are other forces at play, and the Middle East and Syria in particular is being used as a proxy theater for rivalry between the Shiites and the other side of the Islamic conflict. But also there are the terrorism and also the Kurds and various other tribal forces. So the whole situation is very complicated. And don't forget, China is facing a very serious internal problem herself. But now the situation seems to be clearer. And of course, at a time when the United States and other countries are looking inwards, it opens up the opportunity for countries like China and Russia really to be playing a larger role.
So first we have Iran helping Russia, then we have China getting involved. There's a lot of talk that Turkey too will provide some kind of assistance to the Russian side. Is it fair to call this a coalition? And if so, just how strong is it?
Well, in a way, there is definitely more coordination between these countries, China, Russia, and Turkey, who